Casey's Coast to Coast.
I'm Bruce Philip Miller, sitting in for Casey Kasem, and we're up to the latest hit by an English superstar who's part of a very select group of people. During the 22 years of the rock era, very, very few artists have been able to make it big both as solo acts and as a member of a group. Among the unique handful who have are Frankie Valli and Donny Osmond and Rod Stewart. It was back in 1969 when Rod Stewart, along with other members of the English group Faces, signed a contract with Warner Brothers Records. Then, almost immediately, he signed a second, separate contract with another label as a solo artist. And while Faces began turning out a string of hit singles and albums in England and America, Rod was matching their chart successes as a solo artist. In fact, he was doing even better on his own, coming up with a huge #1 single, Maggie May, and a big #1 album, Every Picture Tells a Story. Well, a couple of years ago, after Faces decided to split up, Rod finally began concentrating his full attention on his career as a solo singer. And since then, he's had nothing but super success. This past winter, he had his biggest hit ever, with a huge #1 smash, Tonight's the Night. And this week, he's up to number 32 with his latest. Here's Rod Stewart and The Killing of Georgie.
The hits from coast to coast.
Now, the hit by the superstar who says, quote, "I hate the music business. I hate recording. It bores me stiff. I hate studios. I hate writing songs. The only thing I enjoy is getting up and singing. And when that goes, so will I." Those are the words of Rod Stewart. That's what Rod told Rolling Stone 2 years ago, and then repeated to Cream magazine just a few weeks ago. Rod's been in the news quite a bit recently because of his breakup with actress Britt Eklund. But the stories about his love life never got into his feelings about being a singing star. It's no small thing when an artist as big as Rod Stewart says he hates the business, and that the only pleasure he gets is from singing for a live audience. No press agent advised him to say that, and you wouldn't guess from his records that he felt that way, because he sure sounds good on them. His latest moves up 8 positions to number 30. Here's Rod Stewart, and You're in My Heart.
I didn't know. American Top 40.
We're counting down the most popular songs in the USA as ranked by Billboard magazine.
Number 22.
Here's a man who in his long career has sung lead for quite a collection of bands. He began with Jimmy Powell and the Dimensions and moved on to Long John Baldry and his Hoochie Coochie Men. Then the Soul Agents, Steam Packet, the Shotgun Express, the Jeff Beck Group, and Faces. But he's best known as a solo act. At number 22, Rod Stewart and Tonight I'm Yours.
American Top 40. Top 40.
I'm for Casey Kasem. I'm Charlie Van Dyke on American Top 40. Now, listen to this.
Every day I spend my time drinking wine, feeling fine, waiting here to find the sign that I can understand.
That's a piece of a song called In a Broken Dream. It went to number 56 back in 1972. The label credit went to a studio group, Python Lee Jackson. It was recorded in the 1960s, then released in 1972 to capitalize on the lead singer's success as a solo artist. The lead singer of Python Lee Jackson was a British vocalist who was between groups when he cut his tracks for this band. He did it for a set fee with no royalties or residuals involved. Later, he got a job with an up-and-coming British act called the Jeff Beck Group, and that led to work with another band, The Faces, and a solo recording career. His first solo hit in 1971 was a #1 smash, a two-sided hit featuring Reason to Believe on one side and Maggie May on the other. And in the 13 years since, he's added 2 more #1s, Tonight's the Night and Do You Think I'm Sexy? 3 #1s among a total of 20 top 40 hits for English superstar Rod Stewart. Rod's current hit is at number 16 this week on American Top 40. Here's Some Guys Have All the Luck.
The hits from coast to coast.
At number 19 on American Top 40 this week is another British solo star who lives in L.A. these days, Rod Stewart. Rod's toured the world, across Europe, up and down the Americas, and around East Asia. And he told BAM magazine that all audiences are not the same. Quote, "Not really. I mean, in Japan, they're not as silly as in Los Angeles or San Francisco. And for me, playing Madison Square Garden is a lot more frightening than playing some larger stadiums in New Zealand." That's Rod Stewart reviewing his audiences. His current hit peaked at number 12 last week. Now it slips to 19, Lost in You.
American Top 40.
I'm Shadoe Stevens. This is American Top 40. And next is a man who on tour goes through about 100 soccer balls a month. Rod Stewart is a big soccer fan and plays it a lot himself. And when he's on tour like he is now, he traditionally will kick soccer balls deep into the crowd, about a half a dozen a show. At number 21 in the countdown, still with that youthful vim and vigor and a rosy pink glow in his cheeks, here's Rod Stewart with Forever Young.
CT40 with Casey Kasem.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to our story of why superstar Rod Stewart has owed the British government $275 for the past 20 years and refuses to pay up. Our story really began last week when we told you how Rod Stewart gave up his short career as a professional soccer player and headed for Europe with a harmonica instead. Like a lot of fancy-free kids back in the 60s, he figured he'd pay his way by busking, by playing his harmonica on street corners for spare change. Eventually, he ended up in Spain, and that's where he might have stayed, except that the Spanish government had begun deporting young tourists who didn't have any visible means of support, including hippie, out-of-work musicians like Rod Stewart. Rod says that he tried to smile and charm his way out of his troubles, but when the Spanish authorities found he didn't even have enough money for a hotel room, they asked the British government to send him home. And so Rod was put on a British Airways plane back to London, and at the end of the trip, he was handed a bill for $275. Now, Rod says it was bad enough being tossed out of Spain, but being asked to pay for it added insult to injury. And so for the last 20 years, he's refused to pay that bill, even though the British government keeps trying to get its money back. And he says he has no intention of ever settling that debt, not with the millions of pounds he's paid to the government in taxes. Obviously, it's not that he can't afford it. It's just the principle of the thing. Now, here's that former vagrant turned millionaire rock star with yet another hit, climbing 5 notches to number 33. Rod Stewart's My Heart Can't Tell You No.
American Top 40.
Next on American Top 40 is the 25th Top 40 hit for superstar Rod Stewart. Rod says that one of his proudest moments came when he wasn't singing one of his songs, but a whole stadium of people were. And not at a concert, but at a soccer game in London. Rod told writer Paul Nelson, "Me dad and me were at a football match in Wembley. It was halftime, and I went downstairs to get a drink. And when I came up, my dad was crying. I said, 'What are you crying for?' He said, 'You should have seen it. The whole of Wembley, 80,000 Scots were all singing your song, Sailing.' And my dad thinks my boy started all that, and that means more to me than anything." End of quote from Rod Stewart with a memory for Father's Day. Rod's current hit climbs 5 notches to number 30 this week. Here's Crazy About Her.
Number 24.
Here's the singer who was one of my co-hosts on the American Music Awards. I saw him in concert with my younger sister, and she didn't know a lot of his songs from just a few years ago. That made me feel pretty old. Up 6 notches to number 24. Here's Rod Stewart and his 25th Top 40 hit, Crazy About Her.
American Top 40.
I'm Shadoe Stevens. You're listening to American Top 40. And now a bit of audio archaeology. We've dug into the hit archives and discovered that a superstar who's been hitting the charts for 18 years actually made his first appearance on a hit record almost 26 years ago. No, he didn't sing. He played harmonica on this hit. From the summer of 1964, that's the harmonica solo from the number 2 hit record called My Boy Lollipop by a 16-year-old Jamaican singer named Millie Small. But back in 1964, little did pop music fans realize that the musician playing the harmonica solo on My Boy Lollipop would become a British superstar of the 1970s, 1980s, and now the 90s. He broke big at the start of the 1970s with 3 solo albums that mixed English folk and American R&B and rock and roll. And in 1971, he landed a number 1 song with his first hit, Maggie May. He's had 25 more top 40 hits since. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the mystery harmonica player on the 1964 hit song My Boy Lollipop was none other than Rod Stewart. And his current hit moves up 2 notches to number 3 this week on AT40. Here's Downtown Train by Rod Stewart.
Casey's Top 40.
From Hollywood, this is Casey Kasem. And from London, here's Rod Stewart. Rod may have been born and raised in England, but deep down he feels just like his ancestors, Scottish. Rod even kicked off his world tour in Aberdeen, Scotland, singing the traditional anthem, The Wild Rose of Scotland. This week, Rod's singing the song that jumps 4 notches to number 27, Broken Arrow.
Who else is gonna bring you?
Non-stop hop to the sun.
This next artist is a living legend, and he says his latest tour is the biggest, most ambitious tour of his career. This summer he'll be playing sold-out shows in 35 North American cities and 6 in Europe, all with a full orchestra. Rod Stewart hopes it doesn't get too expensive so he can do it on the whole tour. He's using a 12-piece band along with an 18-member string section. He says with an orchestra, mandolins, accordion, and everything else, I should be able to do every number in the repertoire and make it all sound like the original record. And with more than 20 years of records, a different set of songs is possible every night. He's planned 2-hour rehearsals at every sound check prior to the shows. Patti Smythe is opening for him in North America. And in Austria, Germany, and Bucharest, it's Tina Turner. So you want to count on a Hot Legs duet. The one question left is, could this be Rod's last big tour? He says, I'm not going to be doing this when I'm 80, you know. But I didn't think I was going to be doing it when I was 40 either. Well, this week, 48-year-old Rod Stewart is in Vienna, Austria, and Munich, Germany. And this week on AT40, he's at number 27.
Casey's Top 40.
For Casey Kasem, I'm David Perry, counting down the 40 biggest hits in the USA. Now we're up to the latest hit by a singer with one of the most distinctive voices in rock, a gravelly rasp that's instantly recognizable. But Rod Stewart remembers one night when his distinctive voice was very indistinct. In fact, it was inaudible. It was back in 1968, and Rod was the lead singer for the Jeff Beck Group. The popular British band was booked to do its first concerts in America. The very first show was opening for the Grateful Dead at the legendary Fillmore East Auditorium in New York City, and Rod was more than a little nervous. Well, the concert began and everything seemed fine. The band started playing and Rod stepped up to the mic to sing his opening song, I Ain't Superstitious. The future superstar opened his mouth and nothing came out. Frightened and embarrassed, Rod ran off stage while Jeff Beck covered him for a while with a guitar solo. Once off stage, Rod grabbed the small red velvet bag that his bandmate Ron Wood carried around. In it was a little bottle of brandy. Rod took a small sip and started to relax, but not enough to face the crowd again. So he ran to the front of the stage, grabbed the microphone, and ducked back behind the band's wall of amps. This time, when he tried to sing, his distinctive voice reappeared, and gradually so did Rod, moving from behind the amps to the front of the stage, someplace he's remained ever since. Now holding at number 10 for a second week on Casey's Top 40, here's Rod Stewart, his distinctive voice loud and proud, on Reason to Believe.
Casey's Top 40.
Now we're up to the latest hit for Rod Stewart, a superstar whose first public performance back in 1961 was in front of 100,000 people at a Ban the Bomb rally. Rod was just 16 years old at the time, and he was a complete and total unknown. That didn't stop him, though, from playing to a crowd that most musicians can only dream of. You see, back then, Rod was a rebellious singer and guitar player, a performer who wanted to be the next Woody Guthrie. He wanted to write and sing protest songs that would become the anthem of movements that would change the world. He was in the classic style, a youthful idealist. Early on, he became part of the growing Ban the Bomb movement in England, which was trying to stop the spread of nuclear weapons throughout the world. One of the group's biggest rallies was in a town called Aldermaston, just outside London. The town was a naval base where submarines and battleships equipped with nuclear weapons docked. And on a warm June day back in 1961, it became the focus for the entire Ban the Bomb movement. Supporters showed up from all over the world to say that nuclear weapons were wrong. And for 3 days, leading those thousands of protesters in songs to bolster their spirits was 16-year-old Rod Stewart, both a committed activist and a man who was learning to love basking in the glow of the spotlight. More than 30 years later, Rod is still opposed to nuclear weapons, and he's still leading us in song. This week, his latest hit leaps 8 notches to number 26 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Rod Stewart with his friend Ronnie Wood and a live remake of the Sam Cooke classic, Having a Party.
The hits from coast to coast.
Well, now we're up to the theme from the movie The Three Musketeers, a song performed by a trio of superstars, 2 of whom have been crossing swords for years. The friendly feud between Rod Stewart and Sting goes back more than a decade. Both of them are hardcore practical jokers. And ever since they met at a benefit concert in the early 80s, they've been playing pranks on each other that have increased in complexity. One time, Sting greased Rod Stewart's microphone so the singer couldn't hold on to it. Another time, Rod Stewart filled Sting's dressing room with shaving cream. Well, Sting retaliated by gluing the door to Rod's dressing room closed. Well, when the 2 British superstars finally agreed to work together on the theme from The Three Musketeers, people thought they'd go at each other tooth and nail. But, as it turned out, neither challenged the other to a duel. It seemed they were tired of making each other miserable. In fact, not only did they make up, Sting admitted to Rod that he'd always been a huge fan of his, despite all the awful things Rod had done to him over the years. So it really was all for one and one for all, as Rod Stewart and Sting joined with Bryan Adams to sing this Top 10 smash from 1993. Here's All for Love.
Casey's Coast to Coast.